director at Radio Libra in Paraguay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm greeting you from the other side of the Korean Peninsula. Today is a special day because we celebrate the National Journalist Day in Paraguay. Talking about our issue, a community is a creation of people gathered around words and meaning. We as a social collective are the result of sharing common value, giving transcendent idea. Journalists as depositary of news make possible individual jump from egotistic interest to a social and communitarian interest. Greeks used to define the first as Iliad or idiot, people who just care about themselves. Roman talked later about citizen, people who create a sense of faith altogether. What really matters, this transformation is what we define as a news and how this news shape our common vision. Ideas such as freedom or democracy do not mean anything if somebody put in context, even in conflict situation. We are the result of words, ideas, news, sense of community, and more transcendent, how we see and treat foreigners, people ought to our common value. That condition is the highest peak to reach altogether. I'm living in a country which suffers 35 years of cruel dictatorship, times when many of us were sent to exile, prison, and even killed by courageous attitude toward freedom as embodied many journalists challenged authoritarian regime and gave people the sense of walking together in a broad space of freedom and democracy. Words challenge reality at the beginning and later on change society. Generally, journalists put together common ideals because autocratic regimes tend to divide society in order to govern easily, using fake news and making people fight against each other. In this context, journalists put reality in context and explain the process of dividing society. Putting news rightly requires cultural capacity and high doses of courageous in those environments. By this process is very sensitive in building a democratic society because journalists are choosing and drafting to the people individual and social reference with whom will be possible to build a democratic society. Also are teaching values such as respect to the difference and diversity. When journalists choose issues, people and contexts are shaping democratic society. When you reach a democracy, journalists need to help build institutions. This process is a very complex one because generally many people coming from the ancient regime change and sweeten this wisdom as a democratic one, but deeper inside they really hate this political system, and with a corrupt management of public good made some people feel nostalgia of the authoritarian times. This process, journalists need to individualize who are then, how they are destroying democracy bases, and how people need to learn how to choose public servant, compromise with high values in democracy in every election. Many times political interests make difficult this process, and journalists need to have cultural, political, and social knowledge in terms of separate the good for the bad. This is a very dynamic process where many interests are put in conflict. Under the authoritarian regime was easy to fight against people who oppress and hide the truth, but in democracy, there are many truths that require journalists' savvy approach in order to know what really matters or not in order to build a strong democracy. Institutions are key in any country, but not many public servants really appreciate its transcendence. Beginnings against corruption with good and strong journalist investigation helps to strengthen democracy. This process also requires a real justice who really judge and punish corrupt people. If journalists denounce cases of corruption, but impunity is the norm, the sense of frustration could be a virus to destroy institutions first and democracy at last. Healthy and vibrant democracy are based on rigorous journalism with high values of words, idea, and meaning of citizenship. There is a direct relationship between good journalists and people who read, discuss, and participate in democracy. Generally, poor democracy is also the consequences of poor journalism. There is an expression that says, from the health of the body tells the tongue. Journalists are the high democratic expression of social value, those that make possible to abandon idiot condition to reach citizenship in a free country. Thank you very much.